Well, welcome to the Everyday Discernment podcast. I have a special episode for you today. I am joined from the movie Faith Under Fire. I have the director with me and the producer. So the director is Paul Reisig. Did I get that right?
Reisig, but
Reisig,
close
okay.
enough.
Let me try that
Thank you,
again.
Tim.
So the director is Paul Reisig and the producer Greg Morrison. And the movie is Faith Under Fire, starring Dean Cain, Kevin Sorbo, and Nick Vlasopoulos. So welcome to the show, guys. How are you?
Great. Hey, thank you for having us today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I like I told you before we started, I just saw the movie yesterday and I thought it was, captured my attention the entire time. I stayed up late and watched it, and a very powerful movie. And it's a movie also that I didn't know existed. And I think in this, culture of movies kind of in 2020, people's radar is really off on what's coming out, and it's probably really hard to market right now. And so I'm excited for the opportunity to watch it, and also to have you on the show and talk about it, to hopefully get other people's radar aligned to that this movie exists.
Well, we appreciate you having us on the show for that very reason. And good morning. Thank you for having us, Tim.
So just tell everyone real quick about yourselves, kind of your history with, getting into movies and kind of how this project started.
Greg, go ahead.
Okay. So, I was just telling this to somebody else. When I was a kid, I was an actor, and then I thought, I don't know if I'm that good at this, but maybe I can be a director. And then you get older and you have to get a real job. And I began life and everything. And in my late 20s, I started to say, hey, why am I not doing this thing that I love? And really, by the grace of God, I went and bought a very expensive camera, and I began carrying it around at church. So I was probably this weirdo, this video camera. And at this singles group, this guy comes up to me, it was after church, and he's like, "Oh, you have the such and such model. I have this model." And we started talking, and we said, "Why don't we start making videos for church?" And so we started making, silly, stupid things at first, and then he said, "I've always wanted to do the Screw Tape Letters." So we made a short film, an adaptation of the Screw Tape Letters. And from there, we just began making more and more short films outside of church. But we were all Christians. That's how I met the other producer, Melissa, who spearheaded Faith Under Fire. And we had worked together for years, and then we had gone our separate ways. And she called me back and said, "I want you to meet this fella, Joel. Has a number of movies under his belt. We're making a feature film. It's going to have Dean Cain in it, and it's going to be faith-based." And she brought me in, and that's how I first met Joel, in the very early stages of pre-production on this movie.
Cool. Joel, how about you? How did you get started in film?
Well, I sort of fell backwards into it, to tell you the truth. Right after college, I went to Chicago, as everybody from Michigan is required by law to do. And I lived in downtown Chicago for about 2 years, working as a stand-up comedian. And buddies of mine would constantly watch these movies that they didn't find to be all that funny, and asked me if I, was ever going to write something, if I was ever going to write a movie. And eventually I did. And I literally taught myself this business by reading The Idiot's Guide to Producing, or it may have been Producing for Dummies, one of those two, and then getting out there and doing it. And of course, not all of my early movies are brilliant, and I still have plenty of improvements to make, but I feel like I get better and better every single time. But I'm completely autodidact in this business. And I've now worked with Dean Cain probably 10 times, Kevin Sorbo,
wow,
3-4 times, and a lot of other actors that you would know, Christy Swanson and Richard Karn from Home Improvement, and et cetera. And I started doing a lot of movies that the market really liked and that I was very comfortable doing. For example, Horse Camp, which is a movie about girls going to camp for the summer, horses, and they learn lessons about friendship and kindness and sharing, and et cetera. And then Melissa Curley came to me and asked me if I would help produce a movie with her, a Christian movie. And we went over the story. I was very comfortable with it. I liked her. I liked Greg, the entire team. I thought that this would be a great synergy, and it has been. So I'm very thankful to have done this this wonderful movie with this team, and looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. That's really cool. And thanks for sharing some of your other projects so people can kind of gauge where they've heard you from or where they've seen some of your work. So that's cool. So before we go into the movie, I just want to ask the question I ask all my guests is the time you had godly discernment, since this is the Everyday Discernment podcast. And so in the interest of time, I'll go to you, Greg. So just tell us about a time you've had godly discernment in your life and kind of what that looked like.
So let me ask you something, Tim, because I'm always fascinated by this term discernment.
Yeah.
Because I see in 1 Corinthians 12, it talks about discerning of spirits.
Right.
And I hear people talk all the time, well, I have the gift of discernment. And I'm not sure, I'm curious, since you've made this podcast your own, do you see that thing talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, discerning of spirits, to mean what you're making this podcast about? Or do you have this sort of larger perspective on discernment, just making decisions, that sort of thing?
That's a great question. And in Corinthians, it talks about it as being a spiritual gift of discerning spirits and discerning right from wrong, good from evil. And also in the spiritual aspect of things, discerning the demonic or satanic things. But what I focus on more is decision-making at a base level, having discernment in decisions. And how I define that is having discernment through the knowledge of the Bible, the Holy Spirit within you that can prompt you for a decision, and also through godly relationships that can spur you on and give you kind of the path to go on. And so I talk in my book, Everyday Discernment, about having decision-making ability in all aspects of our life, whether it's through finances, parenting, relationships, in how we use our time, in discerning sin in our life, and discerning counterfeits that are in the church, all these aspects that kind of is a big umbrella for discernment in making better decisions that honor God.
I really appreciate that. And I love how you put that out. I would even say, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but maybe this is hopefully an interesting answer. You know, I know that I myself, I'm a real thinker. And I'm the type that, draws the line down the piece of paper. And when it's time to make a decision, I'll write out pros, I'll write out cons, and that's how I do it. And I have had to learn. I remember I was about 30 and I was actually with a counselor and I was working through problems in my life. And I sort of had to learn to listen to my heart. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, listening to my heart, listening to that still small voice of God, because I'm so logical, and I'm so dependent upon my thinking side. That's not, and it's, well, this is obviously the right decision because the pros outweigh the cons. So I will say, right around that time, I had been offered a job. I'm in sales. I'm an independent contractor with a yearbook publisher, and I've been offered a management job. And there was, all the pros were there, but something just didn't sit right with me. And so I didn't take the job. And I feel like, you never know for sure, but really, I look back on my life and I feel like I'm much happier having stayed where I was. So that's one of those things where I say to myself, it must have been the still small voice of God sort of speaking to me. And even he knew I was going through that in my life, sort of teaching me, this is a time where you throw out the pros and cons list and you follow this little voice.
Yeah. That's really good. And a lot of times peace follows decisions that are from God, where it might seem like the best decision according to the world or other people, but we don't have peace about it. And a lot of times God and the Holy Spirit gives us that peace when in the face of, well, it's the logical choice. Well, it may not be the best choice for you. And God knows that. And then in hindsight, we're often able to see that, oh man, I'm really glad that God steered me away from that. So great. Thank you for sharing, Greg. So Joel, let's go back to the movie now. So Faith Under Fire, how would you pitch this in an elevator to someone real quick?
Absolutely. I would pitch it as a Hollywood looking firefighter movie with a fantastic message of hope, redemption, and to never, ever give up. That is a good film to all people. I need to work on that elevator pitch. I said way too many times. It was a very good question, but now that the movie is made, Tim, I'm not pitching the movie anymore.
True.
I should have, if I were going to AFM, American Film Market, or to Christian Worldview, I would have that elevator pitch down pat. I would have memorized it 20 times in the car before getting there. It's a Hollywood-looking film with Hollywood talent and a great message.
Awesome. I like that. And it's available everywhere, right? All digital platforms, right?
It is available everywhere. It is also, I believe, still playing in a couple of movie theaters. We were originally slated to go to about 75 theaters, but with COVID shut down, that got shrunk to 16 theaters. And then obviously a few people went to the theaters, but our numbers in theaters were much, much smaller than they would have been in a 2019 environment.
Yeah.
But now, that's okay. The most important thing is everybody on the team is healthy and the movie is available to be seen really everywhere.
Awesome. So talk about the production of this movie. What year was it produced in, or, made, and what was that process like working with all these great actors?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I were ever on a witness stand and you were to ask me about certain dates, everyone in court would think I was lying, even if I'm trying to tell you the truth. Greg, do you remember the precise time that we made the movie? I think it's been a year and a half.
I was just going to say it was March and May of 2018, and then we shot our scenes with Kevin around Labor Day of 2018, right? So
okay.
I believe you and I were working on the script when I came in. I think that might have even winter fall of 2017 when I came in.
Perfect. So it takes a little while to go all the way from conception to market. It really does. This is a long process. The second part of your question, Tim, I believe, was what was it like working with Kevin and Dean? So with Dean and I have worked together, I think about 10 times. And I believe this was my third time working with Kevin. So I know both of those guys quite well. But even the very, very first time that I ever worked with Dean Cain, I sent a buddy of mine to pick him up at the airport. And I remember the two of them came walking into set and they were just yelling at each other. And I said, oh, wow, what's going on? And what was happening was Scott was telling Dean that he doesn't know anything about professional football and he has no idea what the nickel defense is for. And Dean was saying, Scott, I played professional football. So honestly, working with Dean from the moment that I met him, it really felt like I was just reunited with a friend that I hadn't seen in about 10 years. That's the type of person that both Dean and Kevin are. They walk in and you feel like you're with one of your college buddies and picking up right where you left off. They're humble. They have no star attitude, none of the nonsense that you see from so many of the Hollywood type celebrities. They're just a couple of normal guys that happen to achieve a level of fame, and now they're using it and making good movies.
And I'm going to jump in there real quick. And Joel had the privilege of directing them. They're also, you can see, we work with lots and lots of actors, and we have some wonderful actors in Michigan. And you saw Nick, he gave a tremendous performance, and it was a really not an easy role. No. But we had Kevin and Dean come in, and you could see why they are stars. They hit their lines. They could just step right in, and their line delivery, if we changed the line, they got it right away, and they were really good. I just wanted to jump in and say that, Joel.
No, that's great.
That's great.
And I was going to say too that I totally agree. Nick was kind of the center point of the movie. It was his story, and he did such a great job with the ups and downs and kind of his struggle through just a terrible situation that he was in, and kind of how faith played a role in that, and also coming to grips with suffering and how we all go through it, and what that does to your faith, and how you ask all these questions that you may not get an answer to. And I was thinking too, you made this 2 years ago, and it's such an appropriate movie for 2020 and beyond now, as people are listening to this in the new year. And that people have gone through suffering maybe more than they ever have in their life in a year like 2020, when there's no respecter of persons in a pandemic, and kind of how you have to come to grips with life, and how everything is not going to be sunshine and roses. even for Christians, and Christianity does not protect you from everything that might go wrong in life, but you do have that hope of eternity, and you do have a God who comforts. So can you share a little bit about kind of your thoughts on that and how people can take away that theme?
So I'd like to step in on that. For me, and I mentioned some of this earlier about, in my early 20s, when we began to write it and to deal with those lines about, and not just those lines, starting with the theme and how are we going to set up these scenes about where is God in the tragedy and what do I do with it? I drew on my own personal experience when I was very young, 21, 22, I got married to a good Christian girl, and we were, and our marriage was, we had our issues. We were very young. And in our late 20s, she just decided she was done. And she's done, and she left, and that was it. There's nothing I could do about it. And I was destroyed, broken. And it really, I don't want to say it shook my faith, but I had to go back and parse out everything and say something that I had done, something in this church that I had been raised didn't work. But I also knew that there was a God. Like, I had experienced the goodness of God. I had experienced the supernatural. And I said, okay, well, even if I don't know if the Bible is true, the words in the Sermon on the Mount are true. And I started with that, and I was like, what can I put back together as I rebuild my faith? And as I did this, I was just broken. Because I grew up in that sort of thing where, you don't get divorced.
Yeah.
And I had to rebuild my theology and everything. And this is not the same thing. Losing a spouse, I think, is actually probably more traumatic than what I went through. But for me, it was a real trauma. And so I found myself putting in the lines of Pastor Dean, the things that I had learned about, one of the lines that he says near the end of the movie is, when we experience a tragedy, we are always asking why God, why did you do this to me? And when I could get past that and start asking God, what do you want me to do with this? It didn't just set me free. I think when you bear somebody else's burdens, you can actually process your own pain and your own grief. And, there's a time when you're just low and you can't even do that. But I've seen it with other people, if you can help somebody else, it helps you. And that's one of the messages that we put into the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I was told you were the resident theologian. Is that true?
I'm laughing now. I think I threw that line out there once. We were talking about our different roles, and I was kind of flippantly said, I'm the theologian. I am not a trained theologian. I love to study God's word. And Joel used the term autodidact. I would say I am also an autodidact, but I love reading theology books and things like that. So I think that's what, Melissa is everyone had their different roles. And a lot of times, even with Melissa, she is awesome. And she's like a driver, but she couldn't put into words. And that's one of the reasons she brought me in, is to actually sort of put in the lines of dialogue. And I don't want to take credit for this. Let me even step back. I didn't write this script. Joel wrote this script with Gary Allison, who Gary was wrote the novel, and Joel wrote the script, co-wrote the script with him. And it is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. I was brought in for 4 or 5 scenes to sort of punch up the theology. So yeah, in that sense, I was the theologian, but I make no.
Greg's being too humble. It was very much a synergy. I appreciate him wanting to say that, but the entire team contributed to this.
Awesome. I was going to ask you at the end if you want to talk about, there's an In Memoriam dedicated the movie to 2 people, I believe. Do you want to talk about who those people were and how they were related to the movie at all?
How well do you know this, Greg? Because those are both Melissa's relatives.
Yeah, I thought it was Melissa's sister. So Melissa's sister died of cancer. And because, you know, that's what the movie is about.
Yeah.
Suffering with cancer.
Yeah.
You know, we raised a portion of our proceeds went to, I don't know which cancer research
That
it is.
melanoma
Okay.
research.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have more information than I have, Joel, on that?
I have given you, this is really a Melissa question, unfortunately, who is the one member of the team that we don't have with us today, but she is handling all that. But it went to melanoma research. We'll stick with that in general. And it's a cancer charity, of course. And all three of us were very proud and very happy to be able to do what we can to help.
That's awesome. Very cool. So what would you say to people that are going through something like this now, like that have a question of faith, that have a feeling of hopelessness, regardless of Christianity or not? What would you just encourage them with if they've been through a tough year, if they've had tragic loss, if they're just feeling like there's nowhere to turn, just either through what you've been in your own life or just kind of the kind of where this movie is pointing people to find that support?
Well, you know, I'm going to preface this by telling the audience that this is a spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen the movie yet and you want to, I would hit pause. You know, I think the message is that you can find good in bad situations. And you take a look first at Dean Cain's character. And when we initially meet him, we think of him as somebody who is in theory only. He's a preacher, a minister, a theologian, and here he is giving advice. And what does he know about it? But halfway through the movie, we find out that he used to be an executive over at Ford, and he had an accident. It just happened. A car jumped over the center line, and he lost his wife and his two boys. And he suffered, and he decided instead of going into depression, despair, into a bottle, that he wanted to bring good into other people's lives. And as he's telling this story to Tom, we also see at the end of the movie where Tom's daughter has written him one final letter, and she has reminded her father that he's a good person and he's trained in medicine and he's a firefighter and he can help so many people. So it's not easy. And just like the earlier version of Dean Cain's character, in all honesty, what do I know about it? You know, I have not suffered in that way, and I really hope that I never do. But the message is that you can find good in bad situations, and there is always a way to help yourself and to help other people.
And I would add to that. You know, so I'm going to be, again, drawing from my own experience. What I took great comfort in when I was dealing with my own difficulties was that we serve a God who is not just sovereign and supreme and powerful, but we serve a God who suffered, and he is acquainted with our sorrows, and he knows our griefs. And it says that in Isaiah. And we actually put that in the movie. You know, there are some comparative religions and things like this where God is, that's what God is. He's sovereign, he's powerful, he would never be weak. And we serve a God who intimately made himself weak, made himself suffer terribly, and he understands pain. And I think there's something very comforting when you're going through pain, when even another human being is able to say, I've been there, I know that. And when you're able to know that the God of the universe is able to say, I've been there, I've known that pain, there's a lot of comfort in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the movie, you talked, or you quoted John 16:33, which is, you know, take heart, in this life you will have suffering, but take heart, for I've overcome the world. And that was just a powerful verse to end on, because too often, you know, there are Christian denominations that will say that, you know, the Christian life is, you'll never suffer and God is always going to, you know, take care of your problems and make you rich. And there's this hyper realized, you know, movement out there in Christianity where it gets people the wrong idea when they join, they accept Jesus and they think like, okay, my life's going to be great now. And there's such a deeper level that can be lost when you just think about it in terms of health and money. And, as Christians, we do believe God can intervene. I believe God's still a God of miracles today, but that's not what we base our faith on. Our faith is in Jesus, who came and died and rose again, and who we have a hope of eternity. And you look at all the martyrs in the world, you look at how people are still getting killed for their faith, and you have to think of, okay, my belief in Christianity has to apply to all cultures and all countries and not just America. There is no such thing as American Christianity. And if you look at Christianity in the big world scheme of things, it is very much a suffering religion. And it is, I think, a disservice to people when we think of American Christianity as just, I can just pray for it and receive it. And prayer is very important. And God loves to give things to his children. And he loves to bless us with things above and beyond just health and money. And there's a peace and a comfort that comes from God when we go through things that is, I would say, supernatural, because, it is that peace that passes all understanding that we're promised in the Bible. Any comments on that, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right, Tim. And I even want to say, I also have experienced, and I believe, and I will speak loudly that I have victory in Jesus.
Yep.
And I believe that old hymn, and I have seen him intervene in my life. But that is not all there is to it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when you talk about martyrs, when you look around the world at people suffering, and I think that's really what the verse from John, take heart, for I have overcome the world, that is talking about that we will experience persecution, and it could be persecution unto death. And we're not going to experience earthly victory. But even, I was just talking about this with my mom. When you look at the life of Paul, for him, to live is Christ, to die is gain. And he hit that point. He was having miraculous things. By the time he gets to Ephesus in the book of Acts, people are they're taking his aprons out and it's healing people. And he's sort of at the peak of the power of his ministry. And then he's like, okay, now I'm going to Jerusalem. And they get the prophecies. If you go to Jerusalem, you're going to be let off in chains. And he's like, that's where I want to go.
Yeah.
And I don't pretend to even understand that. Me personally, no, I want the victory all the time.
Yeah.
But there are times, and obviously Paul was called to it, and we're going to all, if you live long enough, you will experience tragedy, suffering, pain, and I believe that Christianity and the life in the Spirit, if you're in it and living it, it will prepare you for it. You just need to be, that is part and parcel with our faith.
Yeah. I think one of the best, and I'm going to totally butcher where it's at in Acts, but it's in the middle of Acts, and it's the verse where Paul gets released from prison because he prayed and, a major breakthrough. They got released from prison. But right before that, at the beginning of the chapter, it says Herod beheaded, I think it was Thomas, but I'm not 100% sure on that. He beheaded one of the disciples right before that amazing verse of breakthrough. And so you see a dichotomy between the two where there's not a 100% protection. You look at all the apostles and disciples in the Bible alone that got martyred for their faith. But through that, like you're saying, there was tremendous power and breakthrough that God showed up in a miraculous way. And I think the same is today, where his plans and purposes are way beyond what we can understand with our human wisdom. So, Joel, I want to ask you a more lighthearted question. So how was it filming the fire scenes? Those were pretty powerful and amazing. Is there any insight you can give someone like me who doesn't even know how you would go about starting that?
I'm going to just jump in before Joel goes, and I'm going to say that night was awesome. Go ahead, Joel. But it was the most fun I've ever had on set.
That was a great night of filming. And yeah, I mean, we had the entire Northville Fire Department there. Most of the guys that you see, I mean, obviously you see our lead, Nick, and myself playing the best friend, all in gear, but pretty much all of the other guys that you see in the background with small amounts of lines and whatnot, were actual Northville firefighters. You know, we pulled in all of the trucks and the cars, and we made a full background line behind us with the lights going off. We were blowing smoke through the entire set the whole time. We set real fires off in front of us, obviously contained, and we knew where they were. And again, we were with the fire department so they could put out fires. But it was pretty real. It was pretty hot. And boy, we really, when you're doing an independent movie, you've got to move. So myself and my DP set up every single scene ahead of time. And once we started rolling that camera, we knew, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And we just kept plowing through it all night. And we were safe, but we were moving fast, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, that scene was so powerful with him coming down the stairs in slow motion with the girl in his hands, and just the way it was filmed, you know, not knowing much about film, like I could tell that was a really powerful scene, the way, you know, kind of just the slow motion of it and coming through with the fire all around him. And I was like, wow, that was cool. That must have been cool to film.
The entire night that we put together the sequence of fire, the fire scene was a lot of fun filming.
And can we say this, Joel? There's one very quick shot while we're filming, and we had one of the guys he's a real volunteer fireman. So he was in all his gear, but he was working as a grip, and he has the smoke machine, and he walks right through the scene, but you know, he's not the center of the scene because he's pumping out the smoke. It comes by real quick. You would never notice it. But of course, now if the audience, if you're looking for it, you may catch it.
I have seen the movie, I don't know how many times. And finally, at one point, somebody just randomly hit pause. And I said, wait a second. Is this guy, am I looking at this guy blowing smoke through the scene? And my editor said, yeah. And he said, do we need to cut this scene? And I said, play it again from the beginning. And then I watched it again. I'm like, I didn't see the guy that time. It's so fast. But, you know, I've read all kinds of things like that there's a car that drives by in the back of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings or whatever it is. That happens in movies. Yeah. Now, if somebody wants to go and watch our movie 10 times, somewhere in that first fire scene, you see a crew member blowing smoke through the scene.
But I think he's in his fire gear and he's holding equipment, and you just think he's supposed to be there. But he's actually pumping smoke all around.
Like, is this guy starting the fire? What's going on here?
That's right.
Well, I grew up a little bit of a pyro. I would always love to burn things and see how they would burn, you know, never destructive, but I've always been fascinated with fire. So I thought that was a really cool scene.
Can somebody be a little bit of a pyro?
I think you can.
Or are you full on pyro?
You know, it's a good question. Well, if you say full on, then it sounds like you'd like to burn down buildings. So
yeah, no, that's right. Well, but I did the same thing. Me and my friend would go out in the woods, and we would light fires all the time when we were like in our teenagers, and we'd come home and my parents would be like, what's that smell? You smell something burning. And so we learned we would like cover ourselves in brute spray after we came back.
That's hilarious. Cool. So as we wrap this up, is there any other projects you guys would like to talk about and kind of share that you're working on?
Absolutely. We, as a team, myself, Greg, and Melissa, Generation Courage, are making a movie next called Godspeed. And it is about a Christian race car driver with a very positive message for everyone. For my part of the team, Greg is taking on the theology as he always does, and I'm very happy with where that is going with Greg. But for my part, I look at a lot of Christian movies and I say, okay, it had a great message, but it wasn't that good of a film. You know, it didn't have like the fire scene that you were just complimenting us on. I really want to see a movie that looks as close to Days of Thunder as we possibly can. And I would love it if anybody listening wanted to get involved and help us, because the truth of the matter is we can't do these movies without your help. So our website is generationcourage.net. And if you go to our website, you will see an area where if you wanted to, you can make a donation. Another area where there's opportunities to even can play one of the background race car drivers or one of the smaller parts of a race car driver. And then because it is a racing movie, these cars are covered with advertisements. That's the only way that they look right. So if you happen to own a company or know somebody that owns a company that would be interested in sponsoring a race car, we have all the information online on how you contact us about doing that as well. So, hey, if the owner of Chick-fil-A, Hobby Lobby, or anybody else happens to be listening, we would love to partner with you. GenerationCourage.net.
Awesome. Put that in the show notes. And yeah, anything else you guys would like to say that we haven't covered?
Greg?
I just want to say thank you. I think this is a great interview. You're a great interviewer. You have a great demeanor that allows people to sort of to pull out deeper answers. So I appreciate that a lot.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on, both of you. And the movie is Faith Under Fire. I had the pleasure of talking with Joel and Greg today. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Everyday Discernment Podcast. For more information on Discerning Dad, go to discerning-dad.com. Be sure to follow on all the social media platforms. Just search for Discerning Dad. Please share this podcast with a friend and leave an honest review on whichever platform you listen. Feel free to send any comments, suggestions, questions, or prayer requests at discerningdad@outlook.com. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.